Hi, hello, welcome back to the Truthful Ministry podcast. We're going to do a little bit of a one-off, I think, here. Where we're just going to talk about something that kind of came to my mind when we were talking about things that we could just talk about on the podcast. I thought about just the transition between like high school and college, or really high school and the next phase of life. Because a lot, like some people nowadays just don't go to college, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do.
Right.
Some people would argue it's maybe even more beneficial, depending on what avenue you want to go down in life, to not go to college.
Yeah.
So really both. But for us, like I know I graduated high school, went to college, and so
I took a few years off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one thing we were talking about, I think you even brought it up in our little Sunday school thing with the youth, because you just had your D Now weekend, and one thing, it was either Jacob or Noah. Somebody said something about like not taking for granted that you have,
Jacob.
yeah, that you have so many people that are like willing to put on an event for you and volunteer for you, and that you get to go and have fun at these types of events because there's nobody really throwing a camp for adults. Like we're not like me and Cody don't get excited to go to a sleepover like for the church camp anymore. Like we don't go to like the beach or anything like that. Like we don't have a youth ministry group where we show up and like jam out on stage and then have a youth pastor that comes. Like it's just not like that anymore. It looks very different.
Yeah.
But it's still awesome. Obviously, like we're still Christian. We still love the Lord. We still get to have fun. We do things like this.
Right.
And so I just thought it'd be cool to talk about like what that transition looks like. I know for me, I only got to be in youth ministry for 2 years because I kind of came to Christ my junior year of high school. And so it was all kind of quick. And then all of a sudden I go to college, and those 2 years, it was like gone. I had 2 good years of youth ministry, and then I go to college, and I remember going to church and thinking like, well, cool, like I can't go to the youth ministry because I'm not in high school anymore. Like where do I go? And our church didn't have a college ministry at the time. So I very quickly had to be like, all right, well, I'm going to go to big kid church. And thankfully I had already like been experienced with big kid church in a way. We called it big church because it was like, you know, you had the big sanctuary, I guess. I don't know, it was just our slang term for it. But I had already been to big church plenty of times, and I was used to it. We had a good pastor that I liked hearing preach. But it was a weird time of just like, well, what's my faith going to look like now? Because it's kind of been, again, since I didn't come to Christ until I was a Christian, or until I was in high school, it was almost like the backbone of my faith was like, I'm going to go to youth and just be filled like every Sunday. I had a great youth pastor, and every Wednesday. And then all of a sudden I was a little bit more on my own. Thankfully, my youth pastor was still like around. I could like text him and stuff, but it was definitely a transition time. So for me, like, I guess it was like the intentionality of, I knew before I even went to college, before my first day of classes, I went and met with the campus ministries director because I was like, I need to try and make sure I'm plugged in as soon as possible, because I love the Lord and I don't want to fall off, but I also don't want to feel isolated. Like I already felt that way because a lot of my friends that I made in youth group all moved away and went to different colleges and stuff. So I was like, I have to find somewhere that I can go and be and like not feel alone and just be that guy who shows up, goes to class, and leaves. I have to find like something about Jesus to do to keep myself occupied, someone that can fill me up. And I had an amazing campus ministries director in college too, but it was very intentional. I feel like it was a very intentional season of life, especially the first couple years after I graduated high school ministry. What was that time for you like after you graduated high school?
It was kind of it was a rough time for me. I know I preached a couple weeks ago, and kind of in the opening of my sermon, I talk about just that season of life a little bit, because it was a bitter season for me, is when I remember it, because graduating from high school that year or so, I was in youth group a little longer than you, but I mean, we were both kind of in a similar situation where we weren't raised in the church. Our families didn't take us to church. We got saved kind of, separately from our families bringing us. And so, but I was there. I started going to church my freshman year of high school, and very plugged in, super involved in our youth group. I loved youth ministry. I mean, I really loved youth ministry a lot. Obviously, like I loved it so much that before I was like out of high school, I knew like God had raised me up for this. It was calling me to it. So yeah, when I was in youth group, it meant a lot to me. I really enjoyed youth ministry. A lot of people, they get called to ministry, and the big struggle that they deal with and working through their call is, I don't really want to do this, and I've coming to accept it and then to love it. It was kind of the opposite for me. Like I was afraid that I was making up that God was calling me to ministry, because I was so like, I loved youth ministry that much. And then when I graduated high school, I was out of youth ministry, and I'd been going to big church, as we call it. We called it that too.
Nice.
And I was involved regularly on Sunday mornings and things like that. But like I didn't have a connection with much of the rest of my church. I was connected with my youth pastor and the adults that were involved in youth ministry. And so when I graduated, like it happened to be that Christmas after I graduated high school, my youth pastor went to a different church in a completely different city. And like I kind of spiraled a little bit. Like I had a bit of I never like had where I doubted my faith, but I definitely hit a rough patch of like a spiritual low where I was like, I felt like I was being tossed in the wind, tossed in the storm of like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
Because my church also didn't have a college ministry. They didn't have any kind of way to help transition. And that's true from like our church doesn't have a college ministry. And it's just very normal. It's a neglected area, sadly. We were talking about this before the podcast started, like considering the statistics, the fact that it's an often neglected season of life as far as the church ministering to it is really, I think, short-sighted. You said you looked the numbers up.
It was 70%. It was about 70% once they graduate high school will stop going to church.
Yeah, it's super common. And I think about that all the time as a youth minister. Like when I got hired at this position, when they interviewed me and they asked me how I understood what being a youth minister was, like how I would define my role, the way I said it was, my job is to partner with parents in discipling their children so that by the time they graduate high school, they have a firm foundation for their faith. And the reason why I put it that way is it's like, apparently 70% of kids that get through youth group don't have a firm foundation for their faith. And that's very depressing.
It tears me up, man.
It's super sad. And I've been doing it long enough at this point that I've seen several groups graduate. I've seen the kids that you're like, they're involved when they're in youth. They're there regularly. They graduate high school and just walk away. And it's like there's no way to predict it. Well, we'll get to that. There is some indicators, but it can often be something surprising, which kids end up falling away. So
yeah,
ignore the bangs. There's some kids running around. I don't know where these children came from, but there's some kids running around the building.
I think if we were to try and touch for a second on like maybe why that happens before we go into like things that you can do intentionally, like almost to counteract it or something. Like if you're somebody who like right now is like, man, I really want to like stay in my faith, and I think this almost is going to apply to every aspect of your life, like not just the high school to college or like the whatever, like if any transition phase, like people who move, like my great friends Carson and Emily are going through that phase of like, hey, we just moved to a different state, and even though like we're married and we've been in the church and stuff like that, now we're working and we're in this new place, we don't have a church, like we don't know what we're going to do, and it's very easy to just kind of put it on the back burner and just kind of focus on other things, and all of a sudden 6 months, a year go by and you're like, man, we haven't been to church in a while. It's just like, how does that happen? So I think one thing in particular is just with youth especially, I think there are a lot of youth groups and stuff now that are very like fun focused, and I think you and I have talked about this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like it's very like outreach heavy. Yeah. Like how can we just get as many kids in our church as possible? And when you do that, like sure, that's great, you pulled in 30 kids with your event, and it's more than you normally have, but like how many of those kids are going to walk away and be like, okay, I feel like I understand the gospel. I feel like I understand like my role in the church and maybe like how I want to have my own faith, versus how many are going to just walk away and go, dude, that church was cool.
Yeah.
It's like, that's awesome to hear them say, but like
youth group is so much fun.
What it sounds like really deep. Like what matters like eternally, even on an even shorter side than that, like what matters 10 years from now, not necessarily just eternally, but like which is going to matter 10 years from now, that your kid, like that we brought in 25 kids and they had an absolute blast, or that we brought in 6 and they all got saved?
Yeah.
Which one matters more?
Yeah. Got saved and are growing in their faith and take their faith seriously. Yeah. You reminded me, like, youth group was fun. When I interned, this is kind of a random story. In 2017, I interned with a youth ministry at a big church, and there was this other kind of big church in town that was a charismatic church, it's his church is the church we're on. They had a billboard in Owensboro, I don't know if you remember, that we used to just make fun of all the time because it was the dumbest billboard I've ever seen. Like the idea of a billboard being like, this is going to bring people to our church that wouldn't normally just come. And it was kind of a reddish tinted picture, and there's just like a guy like on stage, and it said, "Church is fun." And then at the bottom, like in smaller, like you don't see it unless you're looking, like the name of the church. And it was just like, "Church is fun."
That's so
we roasted that all summer.
Yeah.
Like, man, it's still to me like I don't know what they're going for. Like I'm trying to picture like what they were hoping is going through someone's mind when they see that. Of like, I'm driving to work, and I see this billboard, and I'm like, I could use some fun in my life.
Yeah.
You know what sounds like the most fun thing to do on the weekend? Let's go to church on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Like, as someone who's not a believer and like,
Yeah.
like I don't know, I'd be curious to see if they got any like
Anyone
what the
who
feedback
was
on that
like,
advertising was.
Man, I came here because of that billboard today. Yeah.
Yeah, but low key, like, it's super easy to make fun of that with a church. 80% of youth ministries in our country, that's their entire angle.
Yeah.
Is, hey, youth group is fun. And like we do these really fun events and stuff. Our youth minister is kind of wacky and crazy. Like, he might let us like put like Mentos in some 2 liters or something, and like, just, you never know what's gonna happen. And it's like, one, like you were saying before, that creates a very shallow faith, if any at all. You end up with the majority of your group is just people, coming around to see if there's something fun going on. And then if stuff stops being fun, which if you're going to be genuinely discipling people, you're going to talk about stuff that's not fun. Like, suffering's not fun. It's suffering.
Yeah.
Sacrifice and obedience. These are all good things, but they're not necessarily fun things. And so if your whole shtick is we're fun, all right, now let's talk about the cross of Christ. You're going to lose people.
Yeah.
Because they're not here to hear the gospel because you haven't presented yourself as the place where the gospel is to be found. You're trying to the illustration that works best, in my opinion, is most youth ministries try to feed the gospel to youth the same way that you try to give like pills to dogs. Where you you hide the pill,
like some peanut butter,
in like a sandwich or something, and like the whole point of that is the dog didn't even realize they ate the pill.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's so many kids that go through youth group and never even understood that the gospel was there because it barely was, and if it was hidden around a bunch of fun stuff. Children's ministry has this problem too, but youth ministry, I think it's more egregious. Because youth can handle more than children can.
And I think the transition there too is sometimes people are scared to like upgrade because they know that like when you get a 6th grader that comes into like your middle school ministry or something, they're used to coloring books and just like talking like the only Bible stories you really cover are like Noah and the Ark and Daniel is like the kind of the more they put a fun spin on these like serious stories. And so then when you try to like be a little bit more deep, it's like, wait, why aren't we coloring? Why aren't we playing bingo or something like that? And people are almost as like the minister scared of like backlash. And I think we can't be scared of backlash because it's like it's the gospel. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
If you weren't hired, like I think them asking you, Cody, what is your role at this church was good because it's like you have to understand that you weren't hired to get more kids here. You weren't hired to make sure everybody walks away and says that they had a 10 out of 10 Disneyland experience. You were hired to partner with parents, build up a faith, build a foundation, stuff like that. And one reason why I say that I think what we're going to talk about isn't just for like youth to college or like that thing, it can be any transition, is just because when I think about like what should you be doing and what are you doing, what are you teaching as a youth minister, it's like if you, I'll say it in terms of like for adults, if you aren't figuring out for yourself right now how to read your Bible on your own, how to like genuinely worship and find like a good place of worship, how to have like fellowship and Christian community. If you aren't already figuring out how to like have a good quiet time and figure out what that means for you now, then when your life does transition or does get shaken up, how are you going to expect to have any sort of ability to do that when all of a sudden you're in a new place, new phase of life, new people, and all this stuff? Like if you're not doing it when everything's consistent-ish now, like when are you going to figure it out? And for so many people, it just never gets figured out.
That's what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. That's how he closes it, is if you built your house upon the sand, when the storms come, the house is going to fall.
Yeah.
But if you've built your house on the firm foundation, the solid rock, which is Christ, but more to expand on that, that is, the church, the word, your prayer life, like all that stuff. If you haven't built a firm foundation there, when the storm comes, you're going to be knocked down. And that kind of, another thing I was going to say with the fun thing, the problem with advertising youth ministry is like fun, or there's a reason why churches don't just do that.
Yeah.
It's because it doesn't work long term. Like, but especially nowadays with youth, it's like there was maybe a period of time where, and there's some areas in the world even where there's not a lot to do, and so like if you want to do something fun with your friends, youth ministry is one of the few places you can go to do that.
Yeah.
And there's still some appeal to that. Like there's still, like we do fun events still as a youth group, in order for us as, Christians who are friends to hang out and have a good time. Like there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But when your whole shtick is come to youth group, it's fun. Now what you're like, if you're trying to grab an audience, what they're processing in their mind is, okay, the reason to go to youth group is to have fun. Is there something more fun going on? And increasingly, the answer is there's more fun stuff to do.
Yeah.
Like if you asked me, even as a high schooler, who was, I drank the Kool-Aid on youth group. Like I was all in. If you ask me what's going to be more fun, doing a service project, and then going out to like get pizza afterwards, or sitting at home and playing video games for hours, what am I going to pick?
There's a correct answer.
If the answer, there's a correct answer, what's more fun? That's more the case nowadays. We've increasingly, teenagers are increasingly more isolated, right? And therefore are more comfortable in isolation nowadays. And there's a lot of stuff to keep them entertained.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if your whole spiel is come here for entertainment and to have fun, you're going to lose that fight.
Yeah.
You're just not going to be more fun than what these corporations that are spending billions and billions of dollars. And so if your whole thing, if that's the draw, it's not going to work. And so what does the draw have to be? It has to be what the draw has always been for the church. Gospel community. Yeah. Gospel community. They're coming for the relationships. And that solves so many problems. You get more of a slow burn, right? That's not going to be something flashy that you can put on a flyer for your students to hand out at school. Hey, come here for a gospel-centered relationships and community. Like that's not gonna, but you're gonna have slow, consistent growth, spiritually and literally. You're talking about the fear that so many people have of the sixth grader coming up that's used to doing a bunch of fun games and stuff. And where's all the fun games? Why are they? What's gonna keep them here? It's those older boys are hanging out with me here, right? And don't underestimate the power of the appeal of a 17-year-old guy willing to spend some time for an hour a week with a sixth grader. Yeah. If you do youth ministry, you can see that. There's nothing more effective than having some older leaders in your youth group for drawing the younger kids and getting them to come.
You usually just see that even with siblings. Like if you've had siblings or like you've had like an older cousin, it's just this weird phenomenon when you're younger that you just think like, oh wow, they're older. Like they get to do cooler stuff and they've been around. Like it just, I don't know, you don't know what it is. Like it's hard to psychologically explain, but yeah, just being older. Cool. So when you see the older person that you already think is kind of cool, that's already like, then they're like, you know, walking well in their faith and they're here at church and they want to take time to talk to you, like that's big. Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
It's still cool. Like there's still the, like I go to seminary and I see these guys that are like in their 50s and their 60s, some in their 70s that are like sold out for Christ, that are like super mature in their faith, have been doing this ministry stuff for decades. Like they're cool. Yeah. Like you want to kind of hang out with them.
That's a great, like, when I see clips of like Stuart and Cliff Nettle like debating with people, like, because not only are they great debaters, but like even like in their stuff where they're just like talking, like sometimes they'll go on people's podcasts and they'll just like chat, and like the maturity, like the knowledge and the wisdom they have, I'm just like, these guys are sick. Yeah.
And so like to me, the answer for how do you fix the problem of like when life transition happens of just like these people, we lose people at the church. Like the big one obviously is graduating high school, going off, like that season of life. You lose a lot of people. I think you can answer the question for what causes it for any season change. Why do people drop out at those pressure points? You can find the answer in the big example, which is the transition there. And we mentioned it at the beginning. The church neglects ministering to that age group. And so you've got even these students that were really plugged in and you thought were really locked into like this church thing, their community, like their church was not the church, their church was the youth group. And they're no longer allowed to go to youth group anymore. They never were plugged into the church.
Yeah.
They don't have relationships built up in the church. They have relationships built up in the youth group. That was true for me. My relationships were, who was the person discipling me? It was my youth pastor, right? There are other adults in the church. I don't think, I like in the 4 years I went to youth group, I was like the weird kid that was at everything. I don't know that I had a single conversation with my pastor, ever.
Yeah.
That's not my fault. That's like, honestly, like I love my pastor from back then. He was a good pastor in many ways. One of the ways that he failed as a pastor was neglecting the youth. And you lose a lot of youth when you have that kind of stuff. And so, like, to be perfectly honest, the scriptures give us the answer to how do you retain people over the span of their life, right? Through all these changes and things. Peter tells us, right, those of you who are older in the church, disciple and build relationships with those who are younger than you. That's it. I'm a big believer in 9 times out of 10 in our faith, the answer is not complicated. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy, right? That's a hard thing to accomplish because it takes sacrifice to pour into people and to build relationships with those who are younger than you, maybe less mature in the faith. It takes intentionality, right? You have to have not just a few individuals, which a lot of churches have. Most churches have this, where you've got a couple of people that get it, that take someone and are discipling them. You can't retain an entire generation off the backs of like 5 people, right? It has to be the culture of the church is passionate about building relationships with everybody else in the church, and they're looking for people who are younger than them and bringing them in, and helping them to be involved, right? And what the church often does is it pushes all that stuff off on secondary ministries in the church. You've got children's church, youth group, college ministries, even, I would say, young adults ministry. You've got singles ministries. You've got, you've got a ministry for every age group. And what we end up doing with that is saying, all right, Christian, what you're supposed to do is you go to church on Sunday morning. Maybe you're involved in a Sunday school, right? That Sunday school is age locked. right? So you're going to be around people your age. So you're not going to find people in your Sunday school who are younger than you. And then if we have a ministry in our church targeted for you, come to that. That's also age specific. So you're not going to find people younger than you to pour into, or people older than you to pour into you.
Yeah.
Unless they're like a pastor or something at your church, or someone on staff running a ministry, and that's your experience your whole life. And what that trains Christians to think is, church exists for me to be poured into and find people who are like me, my age, to be friends with.
You're spitting.
And it's sad.
Yeah.
And so honestly, the answer is simple. You've got to build a culture in your church where people just take those who are younger than them and pour into them.
Yeah.
Right? Inviting people, having the older couple who their children are grown and moved out, inviting the new parents that just had their first kid, come over for dinner, right? And then, hey, let me babysit for you so you guys can go out and spend some time, just the two of you. And occasionally, why don't you come over, we'll make you dinner, and if you have questions, let's talk. People don't do that stuff really, and as much as they should. To get back to the high school to college transition, people don't do that with teenagers.
Yeah.
Right? I'm taking up a lot of attention here, but in the podcast, but I think youth ministry is the hardest ministry to find volunteers for, consistently. And every church I've ever been in, easy to find volunteers for children's ministry. If you work in children's ministry, you might be hearing that and being like, well, now that's not fair. And every church I've ever been in, there's 10 times more volunteers of a volunteer base for children's ministry than youth ministry. People don't want to hang out with teenagers. They just don't want to. Because teenagers are difficult.
Very similar.
So they don't. And then when these teenagers graduate out of youth group, they don't have any relationships in the church. Why would they keep coming? Why are we surprised that they stop coming? Maybe, I know you said your experience even. Maybe you go to college, they get plugged into a campus ministry on their college, but that's not church.
Yeah.
They need to go to church. We need church.
I missed out on that for a while. I was blessed with a campus ministry, and it was awesome. And then after a while, I stopped going to the church I had been going to, and I literally had this mindset of maybe I just don't need church. I'm just gonna read the Bible, and I'm all about Jesus, and my campus ministry is cool. So I don't know, because this church, there's just nothing there for me. Maybe I just don't need to go to a church because I've got my campus ministries. And it was I'm trying to find, it was almost imagine being in a desert, and it's the church is water, living, good living water. And then my campus ministries was Coca-Cola. It's a liquid.
Yeah.
And there's probably some water in there, and it's fun. But when I completely got rid of the living water, and all of a sudden I was I'm just gonna try and live off Coca-Cola. It's you're in a desert. Coca-Cola probably feels nice, but it's not gonna last.
Yeah.
So after 3 or 4 months, I remember reaching just a low and feeling literally convicted and guilty. And one day we were in I think we called it Man Up. We had a men's Bible study kind of meeting type thing. And looking back, it's low key kind of funny to think about. The conviction just genuinely randomly all hit me at once in the middle of this meeting, when we were talking about something that wasn't even super related. And so the meeting just kept going, and it was I think everybody kind of handled it right, but I low-key just was weeping. And just the meeting kept going, everybody was talking about, so how do we become better men in this aspect or something like that. And I'm just and finally there's a moment where I can actually speak and stuff, and I was just dude, I just haven't been going to church. I don't know why, but it just hit me in this moment I can't keep doing that. And so I had to go find a church, because campus ministry was awesome, and it really helped my faith. And when I reached that moment of, dang, I haven't been going to church, it's it was because I had kept enough faith a little bit through my intentionality to campus ministries. But thankfully, my campus ministry was good enough to be okay, cool, well, now that you've felt that way, you need to go to church. It was what I really needed was church. But it was, again, that intentionality of, before I even went to college, I was I have to try and make sure that I have someone that can pour into me. And to kind of touch on what you were saying in the same vein, I've always heard a good phrase of like, you should have someone in your life that's pouring into you, someone that you're walking with, and then someone that you're pouring into.
I've taught the same
there's
thing.
There's a popular phrase that people use all throughout the church. It's always like, make disciples who make disciples.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the aspect of like, if the idea is like, if your pastor, God forbid, just like dies tomorrow, the church shouldn't just be like, well, guess we're disbanded now. We're not going to meet anymore.
Yeah.
Or like, if you as a youth pastor, something horrible happens, like your students shouldn't just be like, well, I guess we're not Christians anymore. It's like,
yeah,
it's like something you should be building them up to find other people, and everybody should have these relationships in that same way to where, yes, like the pastor's the leader, and yes, Cody's like in charge of the youth ministry, but we should be all pitching in to some degree. And like you said, people are pouring into people who are pouring into people.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to put it. Jonah goes to a really good church who their like whole like motto basically is like discipleship, and they have like all these different types of discipleship groups, and they'll basically, once you become a member, they'll try and like find someone to partner with you to like disciple you. And if they have someone new come to the church, they'll make sure they're getting discipled, stuff like that. And he always just talks about like, dude, I never realized until I went to this church, like how much that mattered. Because he's like a good Christian. Like he's been faithful his whole life. Like great. I wouldn't say he has like any, he's like not a bad Christian by any means. But he was like, dude, once you experience a church that's like, dude, we're all about discipleship. He was like, I look at every other church and think, how are y'all even in business?
Honestly, like I know for me, the reason why I'm the man I am is because I had some faithful men.
Yeah.
And I can trace it in every season of my life. God has been faithful to me through these men who have discipled me. And like when I think about my time in youth group, it wasn't going to youth group that made me like youth group was as a youth minister. Youth group is good. Take your kids to youth group. I don't remember much of the like lessons and stuff I heard. Like it's in there, but what made a bigger difference for me was like my youth pastor knew like I walked to church a lot, and so he started giving me rides a lot, and so because he was the youth pastor, we were always the first ones there and then the last ones to leave, and so like I'd be walking around helping him set up, and I'd be walking around helping him tear down afterwards. And we would just have 30 minutes, an hour a week combined with those two things, just talking. And he'd ask me how my life's going and like pour it. And like when I got a little older, like my senior year, like he would take me out to go get pizza and stuff. Those are the things I remember.
Yeah, same.
Those are the things I remember.
100% same.
When I graduated high school, I kind of floundered there for a little bit, but I found, at a different church that I started going to, he was the youth pastor there, but he kind of he pulled me into his family a little bit. Like literally, like after church on Sundays, I would go out to eat with him and his family every single week. And his parents like treated me like one of their grandkid or something. And as like a 19-year-old, like he would bring me to his house and like help me work on my car. That's the stuff that like, I had another guy in that season that like he just got a few of the young men in the church and just like, hey, why don't you guys come over to our house? We'll eat a meal and we'll do some Bible study together.
Yeah.
One of the most meaningful things in my life. It wasn't a church program. It wasn't anything like that. Like if you're looking for like, I'm a Christian and I want to serve the Lord and I want to make an impact in a real meaningful way, just find someone younger than you in the church, someone who's less mature in the faith, and just have the courage to step out and say like, hey, do you want to go get some coffee regularly? I'd like to pour into you. Yeah. Right. And I've had every season of my life I've had that, and those have been the most meaningful things, period. And so when I think about youth ministry, like that's what I want youth ministry to feel like. Like I want these students that I have in here, as much as I'm able to have a relationship with me where I can pour into them and do stuff like when Corbin graduated. Corbin is a student that graduated this past year. On his last day of youth group, the last day of summer camp, his final summer camp, I kind of pulled him aside, him and I talked, and I asked him, and it was kind of awkward. It was just going to be a little awkward to make this request. I was like, hey man, like I know you're graduating youth group and I know this is a difficult season of life to kind of make the transition in. I was like, I would love. I made him 2 offers. And I said, and I want you to pray about it for a few months. Like pray about it over the summer and then get back to me. Because I don't want you to make an impulse decision on this. One, I want you to like be a volunteer with the youth group. That way, I could have him alongside me and I could show him how to be a leader rather than just someone who's being poured into in the church. And then I also offered to like meet with him once a week just for discipleship. And just like we read a book together and we talk about it for like an hour before youth group on Wednesday nights. And we don't, like every now and then he has to work or something, and it's like it's not a stressful thing. But it's like he was eager for that. He was eager for it. And Corbin, does Corbin strike you as someone that's like, this is just a guy that really loves reading like theological books?
No.
Corbin, if you're listening, love you to death. Like he doesn't, that's not really, I think he would admit it. That's not his wheelhouse. The first book we did was called You Are a Theologian, and it's a primer on systematic theology. That's not like a,
yeah.
And he took it with stride, and like, I don't think it was because he was just super excited to read that book. I think that God designs his people to desire fellowship and to desire discipleship.
Yeah.
And like it literally is as simple as go look for people to disciple in the church, you'll find them. It's not as though we suffer from an overabundance of disciple makers in our churches. We suffer from a malnourished center of disciple makers, which is to say, there's a lot of demand, not a lot of supply. Yeah. And so if you want to start making disciples, just go find some people.
The harvest is plentiful, the workers are few.
Exactly, yeah.
But to touch on what you were saying, like I would say the exact same thing, the exact same sentiments for my youth pastor. Like, amazing dude, great man of God, don't remember a single sermon. And I honestly don't remember like many of like the games we played or like the hype moments or anything like that. Like I remember like the broad events, like I remember like, oh, did we do this like team event thing? It was really cool, but like I couldn't tell you the specifics, or like I couldn't tell you how much time they spent decorating or what it looked like. Don't remember, but generally the moments that I remember the most are like you were saying, and I've never thought about it in the way of these are the moments I remember, because I always think about like, oh, here's some examples of how cool my youth pastor was, but the moments I remember like pretty vividly are like when he first, I did like a co-op thing with our high school where like if you had a job you could leave early, and I interned at my church with my youth pastor, and like I remember like not knowing what to expect, and the first day like we chatted and stuff, and we were like setting some chairs up, and then he was like, do you want to go ahead and go to Walmart, like here's the church credit card, like you want to go buy the bread? And I remember kind of thinking like, he trusts me to go get the bread, like right. I don't know, this is cool. And then like we got back and we like set up, and then we had time before anything else was going on, and I remember he literally like laid down on the couch and kind of had his phone and was like, so what's been going on, man? He was like, you dating any girls or anything? Like, and I just remember kind of thinking like, we're just like talking, like you're my youth pastor, we're like hanging out, and we like just chatted about stuff, and then eventually like we had similar moments where he texted like me and some of the youth guys and was like, dude, like y'all want to go see this new movie that just came out? Like we'd go, and then one day too, like after he got married, like I helped his wife move out of her apartment. He just like literally texted me and was like, yo, you do anything? You want to come help like Melissa move out? And I was like, okay, sick. And it was just like me, her and her parents and my youth pastor, and we just like up to move out, and like we'd have dinner at his house just randomly, and it was never like you said like a church event, but it was like this dude cares about me, and like I trust him with my life basically, just because he's poured into me so much and he's shown me who he is as a person, that when like I am like in need of some sort of help or spiritual wisdom or whatever, and I'm like, dude, man, yeah, like you're this person that I know you really care about me, and we hang out a lot. Here's this horrible thing I'm going through, whatever. When he like starts spitting wisdom at me, it's like I'm gonna take what he says, because like this guy matters. Yeah, this guy matters to me. He cares about me, whatever he's saying, dude. So I had a great youth pastor like that. So something I thought of that we can kind of begin to close, because I started this late, by the way, so we're probably getting close. Is let's say you're watching this, because we talked about kind of why it happens. We've talked about maybe some ways to prevent that from happening, like on the youth ministry end and things like that. Let's say you were someone who was watching this and you just kind of went through a transition phase or whatever, and you kind of like own it for a second. You're like, dang, I feel like I fell off, or like I've been slacking, whatever that is. Like, what are some steps that you could try and take to kind of get back on the wagon?
I'm glad I was literally thinking about that. You did the transition exactly the way I was going to do it, which is kind of funny because we didn't plan that. So I was already thinking about this, and really, I think like it's also a simple answer. So with all of this, you might be listening and hearing like, oh, all this extra ministry stuff. Then is it like, why do we do that? Why don't we just cut straight to discipleship? Like, why? What is the purpose of these ministries and things going on at the church? Why go to Sunday school? Why don't we just we meet for Sunday worship and then people pair off and go to discipleship? The answer is those places are like where you find discipleship, if that makes sense. And so they serve as kind of like a bridge in my mind. So to go back to talking about Corbin, so like this weekend we had our D Now thing this weekend. One of the qualities of a D Now is I invite college students who don't go to our church to be chaperones for the students. Corbin is a volunteer with our youth group, and there was some miscommunication or something, and he showed up to help. I didn't ask him to show up to help. He just showed up to help. And I remember so we go from Friday night through Sunday morning, like Friday night kind of talking to him and being like, yeah, like we're not going to be staying with the boys. Like I'm going to be going home at the end of the night. And talking to him, and like he had a good heart. Like he had a good attitude about it. He responded to that very well. I could tell he was a little disappointed and was eager to be involved, eager to serve, eager to find a way to be a part of what was going on. And so I kind of, the Spirit kind of put that on my heart. And so the next day, whereas I normally would have been chauffeuring kids around all day, I was like, hey, can you help with that? It would help me out a lot if you would help with that. And there's a little bit his eyes kind of lit up a little bit, and he was like, yeah, I could do that. And he did a great job with it. And so to kind of step back, what that says to me, and I can think of many examples like that, and those were examples in my life and what you were sharing. You need to be poured into. You need to have someone who's discipling you. And how do you find that? You can't force someone to disciple you, but there's definitely ways that you can make yourself more obvious as someone who is looking for it. And it's just, again, simple. Be really involved in your church. Find a place, plug in, get invested in your church, and you're going to stick out, right? What's the saying? The nail that sticks out the highest is the one that gets hammered. Why did my youth pastor start pouring into me? It's because I was there all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not just guessing that. He's explicitly told me that. He's when he was discipling me and becoming a youth minister, he's look for the kids that are invested in there all the time.
Yeah.
Those are the kids that genuinely want to grow in their faith. And you can only pour into so many people, so you've got to choose wisely, right? So if you want to be someone that has these, you need to be looking for these kinds of relationships in your church to get plugged in, build strong bonds in your church. So you need to find a church, plug into it. If you're jumping around at different churches, that happens sometimes. That just happens sometimes. But don't get used to that. Find a church, plug into it. Don't be looking for the perfect church. It doesn't exist. Find a church, plug in. God is faithful even in imperfect churches, thankfully, because they all are. So find one, plug in. Commit to that church. Find a ministry in that church, whether one that exists to serve you, and then just be plugged into it as much as you can. If you're a teenager listening to this, go to your youth group, plug in. Go to everything, even if it's not the most exciting sounding event in the world. Go to it anyway and have a good attitude, right? Or if you're like a Corbin, who, our church doesn't have a college ministry, right? if the opportunity comes for you to volunteer and be a good volunteer.
Yeah, for real.
Like there's going to be some older guys in the church, right? I'm pouring into Corbin, and I'm thankful that God is letting me do that. But like, you know, if other people came up and start work, like we have deacons at our church that are good guys that are looking for people to pour into. They're going to pick the ones that stand out. You know, they're not going to try to invest a lot of their time and energy into someone that like shows up every now and then to Sunday mornings, and that's about it. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to really it's a sacrifice to disciple somebody. You're going to find someone that's going to be worth the sacrifice, you know, because you only have so much time and energy. So anyway, again, I think in both ways, as with most things in our faith, the answer is simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. And so there's not really an excuse. If you feel like you're not being fed, like, you got to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Like, ask for it. If you feel like, you know, you're spinning your wheels, are you reaching out to these younger people and trying to find people to pour into, right? Yeah. Anyway.
I have a couple notes on that. Like, you were talking about finding the church. That's a great point that I didn't even think about that I think I could really touch on, like, right now. With me, like, looking for churches and stuff, I just recently talked to Cody about, and our friend Derek, both about just, like, hopping around churches and trying to find a place to be. And I think sometimes we can really put, like, extra pressure that we don't need on the concept of finding a church.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I think a lot of people are in the same boat where for some reason that just feels like a heavy sentence. Like, find a church. And you're just like, but but there's so many churches, and what am I going to do? And what if I find one and I don't like it? And then what if I go, but then 2 Sundays from now I don't like it? And it almost just feels like this weight for some reason. So like Cody said, like sometimes it happens. Like I also don't want to say like first church you see, walk into that parking lot, go and like prove it. Like that. So for sure.
Maybe we should do an episode of like, how do you find a church?
Yeah. So my short answer, I don't even have time to explain like finding it. But once you feel like you found a church that you're comfortable at in the season and whatever is going on in your life, focus on like that season. That's what I feel like my revelation has just been this last like couple weeks, has genuinely been like, I don't need to put the pressure on myself of, oh, well, what if something happens 5 months from now and my life changes and I can't go here anymore? Or what if a year from now something happens, like whatever. You said it perfectly. It's like we should just be focusing like the season we're in and going all in. Like where does God have you right now? And I think some people can, like that's one I think common reason maybe people don't get back in, like even once they've realized it, like, oh, I've kind of fumbled, I've slacked off, like me, it's easy to think like, but what if something changes? What's going to be the next thing? It's like just focus on where God has you right now.
Yeah, I would even argue to say the scriptures like would say that it's sinful to dwell too much on the future.
Yeah.
Like I always go back to James when he's like, you say, you know, tomorrow we're going to go to such and such place and do some trade, and he's like, what is your life?
Yeah.
You know, like you're a mist that is here one day, gone tomorrow. Instead, it's just like, you know, if the Lord wills, I'm going to go and do this and this. It's like, what does that mean? What that means is stop like overthinking. I have to make a decision right now. I have to make the correct decision.
Yeah.
Or like I'm gonna ruin my life.
Yep.
Our God is bigger than that. Amen. Our God is bigger than that. I tell our students all the time, if you're striving to follow the Lord, if you're trying,
yeah,
God is gonna honor that. Like what God is not grading you on your performance, He's grading you on your effort. If you are trying to be faithful, God is going to lead you where He's intending for you to go. Like God does not fail to accomplish His will. You're either gonna get there going along with Him, or He's gonna drag you there kicking and screaming. God's gonna win. He's gonna get you where He wants you. And so, like wherever you are, find where God is in wherever you are, and plug in there.
Yeah.
And it's again, our world is broken and imperfect because of sin. So there's not going to be a perfect place or a perfect time, right? And that's probably even a good thing, right? Because like, what does that even mean? Like, what is a perfect church? It's a church that is everything that you want it to be.
Ooh. I don't think I want all the right things. Like, I'm not God.
You don't want all the right things. I don't want all the right things.
Yeah.
And like, this is spilling into the how do you find a church talk. But like, Anyway, we'll save it for that. I think that is one that we
Save
should
the
do.
pod.
But you know, if that's something you're interested in, keep listening. But
Yeah, my other notes were just going to be, like you said, talking about like serving, like plug in, find a way to serve, like even if it's something small, and don't be afraid to take like a little bit of a risk. Like don't be like hopefully there are people at the church that are like understanding enough for you to be like, hey, this is something that I've never really done, but I'm kind of interested in it. And if you try it, and all of a sudden there's a very clear like maybe this isn't for you, and like that's fine, but you would be surprised what God can do when you're just like, I feel like I'm called to maybe serve a little bit, maybe I'll try something out. Like God can do a lot, not only like with the end of what you've done, but also like in your own heart. Like the amount of times I've heard people say like, yeah, I was really scared to go on this mission trip, or yeah, I didn't really think that I was going to be a good adult leader. But then like 2 years later, they're like, oh, I'm always going to come back to youth. Or, oh man, that mission trip saved my life, or something like that. Like people, you never know what God can do when you genuinely are just willing to be like, I'm going to put myself out there and try to do this thing. And I think a lot of people can be very intimidated by that. Like we live in an anxious world now, especially.
yeah.
That's probably consistent through all of time. I mean, we just got done talking about Moses when God's like, go tell Pharaoh this, and Moses is like, I'm not that guy. Like, I don't think that's me. Like maybe you're supposed to pick somebody else.
God, you picked the wrong person.
But look what God does for Moses. Like that really like spoke to me like the last couple weeks too. How easy it is for us to just be like, I don't know, God, I think you have the wrong person. Or I don't know, God, I don't think I could do that. And then God, like one of the coldest answers God could give when he's like, I'm slow of speech, man. I don't think I can do it. And God's like, who made your mouth? Yeah. Who made the mouth? Like who made the tongue?
Exactly.
And it's just like how baller of an answer for God, but that's so true. It's like when you think, oh, I'm not the person. I wouldn't know what to say to a student if I were to serve in youth ministry. Or I don't know what I would say if I volunteered to just be a door greeter. I don't know how. Like it's like who made the door? Who made youth? Who made these people? Like God's in control.
The beauty of the whole like discipleship relationship kind of thing when it comes to ministry is for the volunteers that are like, I don't know, like I can't relate to a teenager. You don't need to relate to a teenager. In fact, I would argue, don't even bother trying to. Yeah. They're going to see through that, right? We've got a guy that's the Sunday school teacher for our boys. He's a man in his 50s. He has hardcore boomer energy, right? They love that guy. Yeah. Why? Because that guy loves them, and he's involved in their life.
Come on.
That's all you've got to do. I've been telling people this for years that feel discouraged about volunteering with youth or even with children, but more with youth, is it's like teenagers are, I said this at the beginning, they're isolated and lonely in our age more than ever. Yeah. They are desperate for relationships. They don't even know how desperate they are for relationships. Ooh, yeah, and like, that's a good way to put it. The power of just being someone that's like, hey, I care about you, and I'm interested in your life. What's going on? You need a ride to church? I'll pick you up. Hey, you want to go get something to eat? Like, you don't need to relate to them. As Christians, the thing that unites us is greater than that which makes us different, and that is the Holy Spirit. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is a powerful thing that unites us. We don't need to have, the same lingo, right? The Gen Z buzzwords and stuff. Like, you don't need to know all that, In fact, it kind of works to your favor a little bit. Like, I know for me, like, I've leaned into it with my students of like, making myself look like a giant dork because it's funny. And they kind of know I'm making a joke of it, and it's like, we're all just having a good time. And, so like you're saying, don't over stress about it. Yes. Just do it. God is faithful, and he's bigger than, our worries. If we do what God is calling us to do, he is faithful to bless those efforts. Always. 100% of the time.
Come on. I think that does it, man. Yeah. I think it's a good place to end on. That was a good mic drop moment, low key. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for more. I think that's a great idea that we should have a how to pick a church type episode or how to find a church. That's a great one. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be cool. We'll see you on the next one.
Peace.